the Central Administrative Directorate of the British Sovereign has issued an unprecedented and permanent structural directive that fundamentally alters the operational architecture of the modern British monarchy. King Charles III and Queen Camilla will not establish residence within Buckingham Palace upon the conclusion of the monumental £369 million sterling sovereign infrastructure renovation project scheduled for completion next year. Instead, the sovereign and the Queen consort will maintain their permanent primary residence at Clarence House on the Mall. This decision permanently decouples the administrative and ceremonial headquarters of the Crown from the physical domicile of the reigning monarch, marking the first time in centuries that a British sovereign has fully and voluntarily abandoned the traditional imperial seat of power for the remainder of a historic tenure. The Central Palace Directorate presented this strategic realignment to the international public through an administrative framework of modern fiscal prudence and public optimization. The official corporate narrative states that the choice was designed specifically to maximize institutional functionality, decrease unnecessary operational burdens on the taxpayer-funded sovereign grant budget, and substantially increase international public access to the historic staterooms of Buckingham Palace. By converting the newly renovated state apartments into permanent public exhibition spaces rather than maintaining them as private domestic quarters, the institution claims to be adapting to contemporary economic scrutiny. However, constitutional analysts and institutional observers confirm that this logistical adjustment represents the public manifestation of a deeper structural transition within the House of Windsor. Independent of the architectural announcement, the central administration concurrently published a heavily optimized and drastically reduced official engagement itinerary for King Charles III for the upcoming month of July in the year 2026. The sudden cancellation of multiple high-profile international diplomatic tours, state dinners, and provincial public engagement provides immediate, unassailable evidence that the sovereign requires a highly regimented, isolated environment to facilitate ongoing medical management and systematic clinical recovery. The strategic reduction of the sovereign calendar for July in the year 2026 underscores a shift toward a long-term administrative model wherein physical public appearances are strictly rationed to protect the physical capacity of the head of state. The preference for Clarence House over the expansive environment of Buckingham Palace is directly correlated with the rigorous security and medical privacy requirements dictated by the king's current physical condition. Buckingham Palace is situated within a highly visible, commercially dense, and intensely scrutinized quadrant of central London, making it a constant target for international news syndicates and aggressive media telephoto lenses. Conversely, Clarence House operates as a far more compact architectural structure with highly defensible perimeters and deeply recessed private quarters. The geographical positioning of Clarence House allows for the seamless, completely unmonitored ingress and egress of specialized medical personnel and senior constitutional advisors, ensuring absolute confidentiality over the sovereign's health status. Furthermore, navigating the compact layout of Clarence House eliminates the profound physical strain associated with traversing the multi-acre internal corridors of Buckingham Palace, directly reducing the daily physical exhaustion exerted upon the monarch. The physical containment of King Charles III within Clarence House has catalyzed an immediate, systematic migration of day-to-day administrative authority within the United Kingdom. Highly placed civil service administrators confirm that since the second quarter of the year 2026, the operational center of gravity of the monarchy has effectively relocated to Adelaide Cottage within the private boundaries of Windsor Home Park. This modest 19th-century residence, which serves as the official home and office of Prince William, the Prince of Wales, has become the primary site where critical state decisions, long-term financial directives, and high-level royal household appointments are processed and finalized. The Prince of Wales has assumed the role of de facto regent, steering the active governance of the institution, while finalized document portfolios are transmitted to Clarence House solely for the king to apply his formal sovereign cipher and constitutional signature. To manage the global public perception of this profound transition, the advisory team of the Prince of Wales synchronized these announcements with an unprecedented disclosure of the personal financial data of King Charles III. For the first time in the administrative history of the modern state, the palace released audited taxation data, revealing that the king made a personal tax contribution of £12,900,000 sterling to His Majesty's Revenue and Customs for the fiscal period concluding in the year 2026. This calculation was strategically deployed to neutralize potential Republican opposition regarding the sovereign's diminished public output. By presenting unassailable proof of the king's massive personal financial contribution to the state treasury at the exact moment his physical withdrawal from Buckingham Palace was made permanent, the administration established a robust legal and public relations shield, ensuring that his absence from strenuous public appearances is viewed as a justified administrative transition rather than a dereliction of constitutional duty. Behind the calculated administrative efficiency of the public relations strategy, the structural transformation of the British monarchy has necessitated a definitive settlement of an intense internal conflict regarding the executive authority of the court. The decision to permanently isolate the sovereign operations of King Charles III at Clarence House was immediately preceded by a severe institutional and administrative crisis involving Queen Camilla. As the physical and public involvement of the king began to systematically contract throughout the first half of the year 2026, a critical vacuum of ceremonial and administrative leadership emerged within the royal household. Rather than facilitating a transparent, cooperative transition toward the next generation of the royal family, Queen Camilla utilized her personal administrative apparatus to actively resist the ascending authority of Catherine, the Princess of Wales, leading to a profound division within the walls of the palace. The internal crisis reached a definitive escalation during a highly restricted constitutional planning summit held in mid-May in the year 2026 inside a secured briefing room within the private apartments of Windsor Castle. The purpose of this mandatory administrative session was to finalize the state master schedules, diplomatic seating arrangements, and official order of precedence for the international state visits and major national ceremonies scheduled for the latter half of the year 2026. In a constitutional system where physical positioning, entry sequences, and proximity to the sovereign are the ultimate legal indicators of dynastic authority, King Charles III had issued explicit, non-negotiable written directives prior to the meeting. The king formally designated the central seat of honor at the main briefing table for Catherine, the Princess of Wales, signaling to the entire civil service apparatus that the princess was now the primary administrative representative of the contemporary monarchy. However, when senior constitutional secretaries and permanent officials entered the chamber, they discovered that Queen Camilla had arrived early, intentionally bypassed the signed protocol charts, and seized the central seat designated for the Princess of Wales. When a senior royal equerry politely intervened and presented the official seating diagram authorized by the monarch, the queen consort flatly refused to vacate the position, using her status to overrule the administrative staff. Upon arriving at the threshold of the room, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, instantly recognized the deliberate political defiance inherent in the Queen's positioning. To prevent a catastrophic public confrontation in front of the assembled civil servants, the Princess of Wales demonstrated exceptional institutional discipline by quietly withdrawing from the area entirely. This calculated act of defiance by Queen Camilla was systematically documented, verified, and compiled into a formal administrative dossier by the permanent secretaries present and delivered directly to the private study of King Charles III at Clarence House. The comprehensive dossier contained precise electronic communication logs, altered travel itineraries, and modified logistical directives, proving that the Queen Consort had spent several months utilizing her office to diminish the public prominence of the Princess of Wales while elevating her own ceremonial status. The reaction of King Charles III was defined by absolute clinical determination. The king recognized that the legitimacy of a constitutional monarchy depends entirely upon an unassailable, transparent order of precedence, and any internal attempt to distort that order represented a direct institutional threat to the future stability of the line of succession. Bypassing standard domestic channels, the king summoned Queen Camilla to his private office, dismissed all supporting staff from the corridor, and confronted her directly with the unvarnished written evidence of her administrative overreach. During this intense private confrontation, Queen Camilla defended her actions by articulating a deeply entrenched grievance, stating that after 3 decades of enduring intense public hostility and media vitriol to secure her position as queen consort, she experienced profound anxiety regarding the rapid, absolute ascension of the younger generation. The Queen stated that the global popularity of Princess Catherine made her feel as though her own historic sacrifices were being systematically erased from the narrative of the House of Windsor, driving her to insert herself into the central planning protocols to prevent total erasure. King Charles III listened with objective empathy but remained completely unyielding, informing his wife that the crown was never designed to validate personal narratives and that his primary obligation as sovereign was to secure the future of the state apparatus. Recognizing the absolute finality of the king's position, Queen Camilla performed a dramatic symbolic gesture, detaching her personal royal insignia from her attire and placing it onto the desk to signify that she would no longer carry the public symbols of an office. She was no longer permitted to administratively control. Immediately following the confrontation, King Charles III contacted the highest legal and administrative branch of his constitutional secretariat to formalize the transition through a binding royal decree. The resulting executive order was drafted with total legal permanence, ensuring that the complete restructuring of Queen Camilla's responsibilities could never be rescinded by any future administrative mandate. The direct consequence of this decree was felt the following morning when the Queen's centralized digital diaries were completely cleared, removing a dense schedule of state banquets, international diplomatic tours, and historical charity patronages. Furthermore, the Central Palace administration placed the Queen's public relations team under the strict censorship of the sovereign's main communications office, effectively dismantling the independent household she had constructed over 3 years and terminating her executive influence within the United Kingdom. The total dissolution of Queen Camilla's independent administrative apparatus immediately initiated the next critical phase of the constitutional transition, which focused on the physical and symbolic handover of institutional authority to the younger generation. Within 48 hours of the signing of the royal decree, a highly coordinated administrative eviction was executed within the private offices of Westminster and London, where the Queen Consort had maintained her working headquarters since the coronation in the year 2023. Senior administrators from the Central Palace Directory arrived with formal written orders to systematically vacate the premises. Under the supervision of security personnel, teams of palace archivists entered the rooms to pack historical correspondence files, clear the desks, and remove the private property of the Queen, leaving the extensive state apartments entirely empty. The definitive moment of this administrative transition was crystallized through the formal surrender of the state keys, an act that carried immense legal and symbolic weight within the governance of the monarchy. Under the watchful eyes of the permanent constitutional secretaries, Queen Camilla was required to officially hand over 2 primary sets of keys directly to Catherine, the Princess of Wales. The first was the key to the Central Administrative Directorate at Westminster, which grants complete executive control over the master engagement diaries, high-level diplomatic reception, guest lists, and the organization of major state banquets. The second and most significant set was the Master Keys of Ceremonial Precedence, which governs the physical placement, entry order, and official hierarchy of the royal family during major national events. The handover of these specific chums of keys was not a mere traditional formality, but rather a complete, irreversible transfer of executive power within the court. By receiving these keys, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, officially assumed the title of the primary representative of the contemporary monarchy, effectively giving her office total control over the operational compass of the institution. This transfer completely neutralizes any future attempts by external factions to alter the royal line of succession protocol or diminish the visibility of the heirs to the throne. This drastic internal realignment was intentionally insulated by the strategic disclosure of the sovereign's personal taxation data. The release of the audited figures showing a £12,900,000 sterling tax contribution by King Charles III for the fiscal period ending in the year 2026 served as an absolute administrative shield. This unprecedented financial transparency established a vital social contract with the British public, protecting the reputation of the crown from any potential backlash regarding royal extravagance or the sudden reduction of the king's public schedule. By proving that the sovereign operates with complete financial integrity, the palace secured the legal and public consensus necessary to validate the permanent isolation of the king at Clarence House and the rapid ascension of the Prince and Princess of Wales as the definitive leaders of the modern state. Following the formal surrender of the state keys and the systematic clearing of Queen Camilla's administrative headquarters, King Charles III understood that the long-term survival of the House of Windsor required a completely unified front among those who would inherit the immense responsibilities of this historic reorganization. To secure this institutional alignment, the king summoned the core senior members of the royal family to an emergency constitutional briefing deep within the private apartments of the palace. The assembly included Prince William, the Prince of Wales, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, and Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh. The terminology utilized to describe this gathering within the Central Palace Directory was intentionally precise. This was not a casual family council designed to seek compromise or emotional resolution, but a formal state briefing intended to permanently redistribute the national patronages, civic duties, and ceremonial functions that had been abruptly stripped from the Queen Consort. When the family gathered, the atmosphere within the council chamber was defined by a heavy, professional solemnity that reflected the gravity of the constitutional transition. Prince William, the Prince of Wales, maintained a posture of absolute resolve throughout the proceedings. The heir to the throne had observed the escalating administrative friction and the unauthorized modifications to the protocol charts for several months, and he had arrived at an unyielding institutional conclusion. Prince William articulated his position clearly, stating that the prestige and survival of the House of Windsor in the 21st century depended entirely upon an unassailable, transparent, and unquestioned line of authority. Any internal ambiguity regarding who commanded the primary ceremonial roles or who controlled the central administrative apparatus was no longer just a domestic inconvenience, but a profound reputational and political risk to the stability of the state. The Prince of Wales gave his absolute, vocal support to his father's restrictive decree, reinforcing the absolute necessity of protecting the sovereign transition from any competing internal agendas or parallel courts. The reaction of Catherine, the Princess of Wales, to this massive redistribution of institutional power was exceptionally nuanced and deeply considered. As the senior private secretaries presented the newly revised State Master Schedule, which placed her name at the absolute center of the grandest national events, state banquets, and opening ceremonies previously allocated exclusively to the Queen Consort, the princess remained completely silent for several moments. She recognized the immense psychological and political weight of the position she was being asked to occupy, and she understood that any sudden, highly visible elevation could be interpreted by the global public as a personal victory over an older woman. To protect the integrity of the crown, Princess Catherine spoke privately with Prince William, insisting that there must be absolutely no public celebration, no triumphalist press coverage, and no overt media campaigns highlighting her new monopoly over the ceremonial court. She demanded that the transition appear entirely seamless, natural, and driven solely by institutional necessity, rather than personal ambition or internal rivalry. Princess Anne, widely regarded as the most disciplined and hardworking member of the institution, provided the definitive institutional verdict during the summit. She looked directly at her brother, the king, and stated that the strict principles of sovereign discipline must apply to those closest to the monarch just as stringently as they applied to anyone else within the realm. Princess Anne argued that attempting to shield Queen Camilla from the consequences of her administrative overreach would not save the royal marriage, but would instead permanently fracture the constitutional authority of the crown and invite public scrutiny. Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh, remained largely quiet throughout the proceeding, but his presence and silent nod of agreement confirmed the absolute unanimity of the family core. The royal core had reached a total consensus, ensuring that the new decree was backed by the full weight of the dynasty, allowing King Charles III to sign the final constitutional documents with complete confidence that the family stood united behind his historic decision. The final signature of the monarch on the constitutional decree initiated a wave of rapid, irreversible changes that moved through the administrative networks of the state like a cold current. While the high-level palace officials worked to secure the new structure, the mechanical reality of the decision fell upon the staff members who managed the daily life of the court. The first physical manifestation of this transition occurred within the private offices of Westminster and London, where the Queen Consort had maintained her administrative headquarters for nearly 3 years. By early afternoon, the senior administrators of the Central Palace Directory arrived with formal written orders to vacate the premises, signaling the immediate end of an era. The scene inside the Queen's working apartments was marked by a quiet, professional finality that stunned the remaining personal aides. Large wooden storage containers were brought into the rooms by security staff, and a designated team of palace archivists began the systematic process of clearing the desks, organizing the correspondence files, and removing the personal property of the Queen. Every object removed from the environment carried a profound symbolic weight, representing the rapid dismantling of a parallel court that had once attempted to challenge the established sovereign line of succession. The framed photographs that had lined the walls were taken down one by one, leaving empty spaces on the fabric of the staterooms. When a young assistant reached for a large, historic photograph of King Charles III, Queen Camilla stepped forward and stopped the aide with a quiet gesture. She reached out, took the framed image into her own hands, and held it tightly as the work continued around her. The man in that photograph had been her protector for nearly her entire life, standing by her side through decades of public condemnation, intense societal hostility, and media storms that would have broken the resolve of most individuals. Yet, it was his precise signature, applied to the official administrative document, now resting in the mailbox of every senior courtier, that had authorized this total eviction. The irony of the situation was absolute. A powerful reminder that within the cold architecture of a constitutional monarchy, the crown must always outlast the individual. As the afternoon progressed, further administrative documents arrived from the Central Chancery, formalizing the redistribution of the Queen's substantial public footprint. A vast network of national charities, military patronages, and historic civic organizations that had previously held formal relationships with Camilla received official letters signed by the head of the civil service. These letters informed the organizations that their future royal patron and representative would no longer be the Queen Consort. Instead, the responsibility for these vital public duties was officially transferred to Catherine, the Princess of Wales, and Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh. Each individual piece of correspondence served as a minor, quiet confirmation that this absence was permanent and designed to last for the remainder of the reign. The Queen turned the pages of the newly revised state calendar, observing the systematic eradication of her presence from the grand events of the nation. The upcoming state opening of Parliament, the formal receptions for foreign heads of state, and the traditional national processions had all been carefully restructured by the constitutional secretaries. Her name had been entirely removed from the official order of precedence and the grand state carriages. She would no longer walk beside the king during the opening ceremonies of the realm, nor would she occupy the historic chair of state that had been her right since the coronation in May of the year 2023. The profound loss of status was no longer a private matter discussed behind closed doors. It was now an established administrative reality, woven directly into the fabric of the British state. Late that evening, as the final administrative tasks were completed, King Charles III walked slowly down the long gallery toward the private offices. He stopped outside the door of the room that had served as his wife's headquarters, looking at the empty space where her personal emblem had been removed from the entryway just hours before. Those who were present in the corridor noticed that the king stood in absolute silence for several moments, his eyes fixed on the door handle, yet he made no move to enter the room or disturb the quiet inside. The emotional weight of the decision was visible in his posture, a physical manifestation of the immense sacrifice required to maintain the absolute integrity of his constitutional oath. No advisors were permitted to carry messages between the two apartments that night, and no official announcements were transmitted to the international press. Instead, a simple, handwritten letter was delivered to the Queen's quarters by a trusted page, requesting her presence at dawn in the small garden room located on the ground floor of the palace. The location was intentionally chosen for its complete isolation from the machinery of the court, a space stripped of titles, documents, and formal staff members. By the time the sun set over the capital, the institution had completed everything that the sovereign order required. At the next sunrise, the king would have to face the personal reality that his own decree had created, balancing the cold demands of the British throne with the enduring reality of human affection. The small garden room was completely silent when King Charles III arrived at the designated hour of dawn. No private secretaries were present to arrange the state paperwork on the table, no personal aides stood outside the heavy glass doors to monitor the corridor, and no senior family members were positioned nearby to control the direction of the conversation. The king had arrived early, choosing to sit alone in the morning light that filtered through the high windows overlooking the private lawns of the estate. A few minutes later, Queen Camilla entered the chamber, walking with a slow, deliberate dignity and carrying the large framed photograph of her husband that she had personally removed from her office wall the previous afternoon. For the first time since the historic decree had been finalized by the Constitutional Secretariat, the two most prominent figures in the kingdom stood face to face, stripped of the formal institutional structures that had governed their lives for decades. According to the private observations of senior royal commentators who have monitored the relationship between the monarch and his wife throughout their long public journey, what occurred in the garden room was not an administrative negotiation. Queen Camilla did not enter the space to demand a reversal of the sovereign decision or to plead for the restoration of her public status. She had already recognized the total finality of the legal documents signed by the king. Instead, she had come to ask a single, profound question that the official constitutional paperwork had left unanswered, demanding to know whether the king had enacted this permanent exile because her recent actions had embarrassed the family institution, or whether he had acted because he no longer possessed any personal trust in her loyalty. King Charles III answered his wife with an unvarnished, direct honesty that reflected the immense gravity of the situation. He looked at her and stated clearly that his personal love for her had not changed, emphasizing that the difficult decision did not originate from a place of personal rejection or emotional coldness. He explained that the mandate was driven entirely by the unique position he occupied and the heavy constitutional obligations he carried as the reigning sovereign, duties that existed completely separate from any human emotions he possessed as a husband. The rapid advancement and expanding public prominence of Princess Catherine was not a calculated strategy to diminish the personal achievements of the Queen, but was rather an essential preparation that the British monarchy required to guarantee its survival in the modern era, a long-term institutional strategy that could not be obstructed by any personal attachments. Queen Camilla listened to the king's words in silence, and then she delivered a response that her husband had not anticipated. She looked at the monarch and stated that she fully understood his position, expressing a deep, complex comprehension that came from recognizing her own hidden vulnerabilities clearly for the first time in her adult life. She explained that she had spent nearly her entire existence fighting for a basic level of societal acceptance amidst a torrent of public hatred, ridicule, and deep isolation. She had endured decades of intense condemnation to finally stand beside him as queen consort, yet witnessing the magnificent global rise and effortless popularity of Princess Catherine had awakened an existential terror within her heart. Her disruptive actions at Windsor Castle had been triggered by a desperate fear that all of her historical sacrifices would be completely forgotten by the state, and that her legacy would be instantly erased the moment the younger generation assumed full control of the court. With a quiet finality, the Queen placed the framed photograph onto the wooden table between them, stating that she would completely cease her struggle against the ascension of the Princess of Wales. She confirmed that there would be no further attempts to alter the protocol schedules, no internal family pressure regarding the order of precedence, and no subtle manipulations of the state calendar. The internal competition for administrative dominance within the palace was permanently concluded. By the time the morning meeting adjourned, the structural equilibrium of the British crown had been fully restored, ensuring that the transition of executive responsibilities to Prince William and Princess Catherine would proceed without internal interference. The House of Windsor had successfully insulated its core operations, securing its institutional survival through absolute discipline and an unyielding commitment to constitutional continuity.